The UNHS Nightingale moved through the darkness of space like a ghost. Its white hull stood out against the black void, marked with bright red crosses that could be seen from any direction. These crosses were an ancient symbol of healing and safety that all species in the galaxy recognized. Captain Jin Park stood tall on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen. The blue-green world of Proxima IV grew larger as they approached. His hands were clasped behind his back, knuckles white from tension. "Captain, we're broadcasting our neutral status on all channels," Lieutenant Kim said from her station. Her fingers moved quickly across the control panel, making sure their message of peace reached every corner of this troubled system. "Any response from the surface?" Park asked. "Both sides of the conflict have acknowledged our arrival. The northern continent has cleared a landing zone near their main medical facility." Park nodded. The Nightingale was Earth's newest and largest hospital ship. It carried 300 medical staff and enough supplies to treat thousands. The ship had no weapons, not even defensive shields that could be repurposed for attack. Its only protection was the universal agreement that medical vessels should never be harmed. Dr. Bai reports all medical teams are ready for deployment, Communications Officer Ju added. They've prepared for both species' physiologies. The war on Proxima IV had been raging for 3 years. The native Proxians fought against Tauran colonists over resource rights. Both sides had suffered heavy losses, and their medical systems were overwhelmed. Park moved to the large window and stared at the approaching planet. His reflection looked back at him. The gray at his temples had increased since his last mission. 8 years as captain of a hospital ship had aged him. "Sir," Lieutenant Kim said quietly, moving to stand beside him. "The crew is nervous. The Taurans have a reputation for unpredictability. All the more reason for us to be there," Park replied. "The injured don't care about politics." Kim nodded and returned to her station. Park continued looking at the planet, but his mind was elsewhere. 5 years ago, his sister had served as a doctor on the UNHS Mercy. That ship had answered a distress call from a mining colony, only to be caught in crossfire when fighting renewed. The Mercy had escaped, but not before taking damage that killed 27 medical personnel. His sister Han had been among them. "Captain," Navigator Sun called out, "we're receiving approach vectors for orbit. Take us in, standard approach. Keep broadcasting our status." The bridge crew worked efficiently as the Nightingale began its descent toward the planet. Medical teams throughout the ship prepared their equipment. In the largest surgical bay, Dr. Minbai reviewed the latest reports on the planet's casualties. "We'll set up triage in both locations," she told her team. "Remember, we treat by severity, not by uniform or species." Back on the bridge, Park felt the slight vibration as the ship entered the upper atmosphere. The view screen showed clouds parting around their hull. "Any military activity?" he asked. "Nothing near our landing zone," Security Officer Ryu replied. "Fighting continues on the western continent, but our course keeps us well away from combat areas." Park nodded. "Good. Once we're established, we'll send shuttles to evacuation points to transport the most critical cases." The Nightingale descended through layers of clouds. Below them, a war-torn landscape came into view. Even from this height, they could see the destruction. Burned forests, craters where cities had stood, refugee camps sprawling across once fertile plains. As they approached the landing zone, Park thought again of his sister. "This time will be different," he whispered to himself. The Nightingale would complete its mission. It would save lives from both sides of this pointless war. It had to. "Final approach," Sun announced. "Landing zone is clear." Park straightened his uniform. "Take us down, and let's get to work." The massive hospital ship settled onto the landing pad with barely a sound. Within minutes, ramps extended and medical teams began to deploy. Captain Park watched from the bridge as doctors, nurses, and medics moved out in perfect order, carrying their equipment. The mission had begun. The Nightingale had arrived to heal the wounds of war, protected only by the red crosses on its hull and humanity's belief that some things should remain sacred even in times of conflict. Dr. Minna Lee pulled off her surgical gloves with a snap and tossed them into the disposal unit. Her back ached after 6 hours of standing over the operating table. This was her 4th surgery today, and the sun hadn't even set on Proxima IV yet. "Patient stable?" asked Nurse June as he monitored the vital signs of the torn soldier on the table. "Yes, the internal bleeding is controlled. Move him to recovery and keep him sedated for at least 8 hours." Dr. Lee wiped the sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. The makeshift medical bay, set up in what had once been a school gymnasium, was hot and humid. The air filters on the Nightingale worked perfectly, but here on the surface, they made do with local systems. She stepped out of the surgical area and into the main floor of the medical bay. Rows of beds filled the space, some occupied by blue-skinned Proxians, others by the more human-like Taurans. Medical staff in white uniforms moved between them, checking vitals, changing bandages, and offering comfort. Dr. Lee called Dr. Ba from across the room. "We have 3 more incoming from the Eastern Front, 2 Proxians and 1 Tauran, all with blast injuries." Lee nodded and headed for the sterilization chamber to prepare for her next surgery. As she passed between the beds, a Tauran soldier grabbed her arm. "Why are you helping them?" he growled, pointing to a Proxian in the next bed. "They started this war. They bombed our settlements." Dr. Lee gently removed his hand from her arm. "Here, there are no sides. Only patience. Everyone receives care." The soldier fell back against his pillow, muttering under his breath. Lee had heard the same complaints from both sides dozens of times since their arrival 3 days ago. "Dr. Lee to communications, please," came Captain Park's voice over the intercom. Lee changed direction and headed for the small room they had set up as a command center. Inside, Captain Park stood with Commander Choi, both looking at a display screen showing the space above Proxima IV. "What's the situation?" she asked. Commander Choi pointed to the screen. 3 ships just appeared in orbit. Their Corvin design. Lee frowned. The Corvins were not part of this conflict. Their empire controlled several systems 2 sectors away, but they had no official presence on Proxima IV. "Why would the Corvins be here?" she asked. "Unknown," Captain Park replied, his face tight with concern. "But their ships are warships, not diplomatic vessels." On the screen, the 3 Corvin ships moved into a triangular formation. Their angular shapes reminded Lee of the predatory birds that hunted in the mountains of her home province on Earth. "Have they responded to our hails?" Lee asked. "No," said Communications Officer Ju. "We've sent standard greetings on all frequencies. They're receiving but not answering." Captain Park turned to Dr. Lee. "How many patients can we evacuate if needed?" Lee calculated quickly. "Maybe 30 of the most critical cases. The rest would need to stay until the shuttles could return." "I don't like this," Commander Choi said, watching the Corvin ships. "Their weapon systems are active. I can detect energy buildup. Are they targeting us?" Park asked. "Not directly. Not yet. But their positions give them coverage of both our ground facility and the Nightingale in orbit." Captain Park considered this information, then made his decision. "Continue normal operations. Increase the broadcast frequency of our medical status. Make sure they know exactly who and what we are." "Sir," Choi protested, "perhaps we should begin evacuation procedures as a precaution." "We have over 200 patients who can't be moved," Lee reminded him. "And we're in the middle of treating blast victims from the Eastern Front." Park nodded. "We continue our mission. The Corvins have no reason to interfere with a medical vessel. We're helping everyone here, including any of their people who might be injured." "Yes, sir," Choi said, though he looked unconvinced. Lee returned to the main floor to prepare for the incoming wounded. As she worked, she couldn't help but glance up at the ceiling, imagining the 3 Corvin warships hovering above them like vultures. "Doctor, first patient is prepped," called Nurse June. Lee pushed the Corvins from her mind and focused on what she did best, healing the wounded. Whatever was happening in orbit, her duty remained clear. The Nightingale had come to Proxima IV to save lives, and that's exactly what she would continue to do. As she walked to the surgical area, the lights flickered briefly. No one seemed to notice except her. A cold feeling settled in her stomach, but she pushed it aside. The universal protection of medical vessels had been respected for over a century. Surely even the Corvins would honor that tradition. She had to believe that. The alternative was unthinkable. The day had been quiet for 3 hours. Too quiet, Dr. Lee thought as she checked on a young Proxian child recovering from surgery. The Corvin ships had remained in orbit, silent and watchful. Captain Park had ordered half the medical staff back to the Nightingale to rest while the ground team continued working. Dr. Lee had just finished her shift and was preparing to return to the ship when the first tremor shook the ground. At first, she thought it was a natural quake. Proxima IV was known for its unstable tectonic activity. Then the emergency channel on her communicator burst to life. All personnel, we are under attack. Captain Park's voice was steady but urgent. The Nightingale has been hit. This is not a drill. Ground team, prepare for incoming casualties. Lee froze, her mind refusing to accept what she was hearing. Attack. On a hospital ship. It was unthinkable. Nurse Kang's voice came through next, high with panic. They're firing on us. The first blast hit the port side, the nursery section. In the background, alarms blared and people shouted. Dr. Lee snapped into action. Prepare all available beds. She ordered the ground team. Set up triage in the courtyard for incoming evacuees. Her communicator continued to relay the horror unfolding in orbit. Captain Park's voice broadcast continuously. This is UNHS Nightingale to all vessels. We are an unarmed medical vessel. Cease fire. Cease fire. We have patients and children aboard. The response was another blast that shook the ship so hard that even through the communicator, Lee could hear metal tearing. On the surface, Dr. Lee and her team worked frantically to prepare for survivors. The first shuttle appeared in the sky, descending rapidly, too rapidly. It was damaged, one thruster failing. It landed hard in the field beside their facility, skidding to a stop. Lee ran to the craft as its door opened. Medical staff and patients poured out, some injured from the rough landing. Nurse Kang stumbled out last, her uniform singed and face streaked with soot. What happened? Lee demanded, helping a limping doctor from the shuttle. They attacked without warning. Kang gasped. 3 direct hits so far. The captain is evacuating everyone he can. But she stopped, unable to continue. But what? Lee pressed. The nursery, Dr. Lee. It's gone. 23 infants and children. 5 medical staff. Kang's voice broke. They targeted it first. Lee felt the blood drain from her face. The nursery had been clearly marked on the exterior of the ship with the universal symbol for pediatric care. There was no way it could have been mistaken for anything else. Above them, the sky flashed. Looking up, they saw the unthinkable. The Nightingale, its white hull now punctured and burning in multiple places, was taking another hit from the Corvin ships. The energy beam cut through the main medical bay like a knife. No, screamed Kang, falling to her knees. Lee's communicator crackled. It was Captain Park, his voice now strained. This is final evacuation order. All remaining personnel to escape pods. We are broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. Let the record show that the UNHS Nightingale, a clearly marked medical vessel, was deliberately attacked by Corvin warships on this date. In the background, someone shouted that the main power core was destabilizing. Get as many people as you can to the surface, Park continued. I'll make sure our final moments are recorded for all to witness. Lee watched helplessly as a second shuttle tried to launch from the Nightingale, only to be targeted by one of the Corvin ships. It exploded in a brief, terrible flare of light. They're shooting the escape vessels, she whispered in horror. Around her, The medical team and evacuees who had made it to the surface stood frozen, watching the destruction of their ship. The Nightingale's remaining escape pods launched, small white dots against the darkness of space. Some made it clear of the ship. Others were picked off by precise Corvin fire. Then the Nightingale's power core failed. The explosion bloomed silently in space, a terrible flower of light and debris. The shock wave reached the surface minutes later, a low rumble that shook the ground beneath their feet. Lee's communicator, still connected to the ship's emergency channel, broadcast nothing but static. "Why?" asked a young medic beside her. "Why would they do this?" Dr. Lee had no answer. She stared at the sky where the Nightingale had been, now just a spreading cloud of debris. Hundreds of lives, patients, medical staff, children, gone in minutes. The Corvin ships turned away from the destruction they had created and vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind nothing but death and an act so unforgivable that it would echo across the galaxy. In that moment, Dr. Lee knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Admiral Da-Yun stood perfectly still before the United Earth Council. The large chamber, with its high ceiling and curved walls, was designed to echo even whispers to every corner. Today, it was so quiet that the soft hum of the air systems seemed loud. 50 council members sat in tiered seats facing him. They represented every region of Earth and humanity's colonies. Their faces showed shock, grief, and a growing anger. On the giant screen behind Admiral Yun, the final moments of the UNHS Nightingale played in a silent loop. The hospital ship, clearly marked with red crosses, being systematically destroyed by Corvin warships. The footage ended with Captain Park's final broadcast, his calm voice stating the facts as the bridge collapsed around him. "The attack on our hospital ship was unprovoked and deliberate," Admiral Yun said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady but tight with controlled emotion. "We lost 347 medical personnel, 73 children in the pediatric unit, 219 patients who could not be evacuated." Councilor Rivera from South America leaned forward. "How many survivors?" 86, mostly from the surface medical camp. Yun's jaw tightened. The Corvins specifically targeted escape pods. Dr. Lee and a few others managed to reach the surface before the main attack began. "This is beyond barbaric," said Councilor Okafor from the African Union. "It violates every convention of warfare established in the last 3 centuries. Admiral Yun nodded. The Corvins left no survivors in space. They intended to leave no witnesses at all. "But why?" asked Councilor Chen from East Asia. "What possible reason could they have for attacking a hospital ship?" "We have a theory," Yun replied. "Intelligence suggests the Corvins have been secretly supporting the Tauran side in the Proxima conflict. Our medical teams were treating both sides equally. The Corvins may have seen this as interfering with their proxy war." The council chamber erupted in angry voices. Chairperson Patel raised her hand for silence. "Admiral Yun," she said when quiet returned, "what response do you recommend?" Yun looked at each council member before answering. "For generations, we have maintained peace. We have hidden our strength." He paused. "That ends today." He pressed a button on his wrist device. The screen behind him changed to show a map of Earth, with locations highlighted across every continent and under every ocean. "These are our hidden shipyards, facilities that have remained dormant but ready for decades." More images appeared. Massive warships in underground bunkers, underwater hangars, and concealed orbital platforms. The council members murmured in surprise. Many had not known the full extent of Earth's secret military capability. For 200 years, humanity has presented itself to the galaxy as primarily a peaceful, medical, and scientific power, Yun continued. After the Martian Civil War, we decided never again to turn our weapons on each other. Instead, we built the hospital ships. We offered aid to any world that needed it. "But we're not defenseless," Councilor Okafor noted. "No," Yun agreed. "While building hospitals with one hand, we quietly built warships with the other. not for conquest, but as a safeguard. The fleet has never been activated, until now. The screen showed new images, massive hangar doors opening around the world. Shipyard workers rushed to vessels that hadn't seen use in generations. "How many ships do we have?" asked Counselor Rivera. 3,417 combat-ready vessels, Yoon replied, plus support craft. The council chamber fell silent again as the number sank in. Earth had publicly acknowledged a defense fleet of perhaps 50 ships. The actual number was almost 70 times greater. The Corvins believed they could destroy our hospital ship and face no consequences, Yoon said into the silence. They thought us weak because we choose to heal rather than harm. They must learn that humanity's restraint is a choice, not a limitation. Chairperson Patel stood. "Admiral Yoon, what exactly are you proposing?" "A proportional response," he answered. "We will not target Corvin civilians or medical facilities. We are not them, but we will dismantle their military capability completely. We will bring those responsible for the Nightingale's destruction to justice." The council voted immediately and unanimously. Authorization for full military response was granted. As Admiral Yoon left the council chamber, his aide approached with a secure communication device. "The fleet captains are standing by, sir." Yoon took the device and spoke clearly. "This is Admiral Yoon. Operation Nightingale is approved. All ships prepare for immediate deployment. Across Earth, in hidden bases beneath mountains, oceans, and deserts, thousands of warships hummed to life. Crews that had trained for years in secret reported to their stations. Weapon systems that had never been used in actual combat were brought online. Humanity had maintained peace for generations. Now the galaxy would learn why the other species had been wise to let them do so. The stars rippled and parted as the first wave of Earth's ships tore through the fabric of space. Commander Ta Song stood on the bridge of the EDF Vengeance, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the tactical display. The massive screen showed blue dots appearing in perfect grid formation, each dot representing a human warship emerging from hyperspace. "First wave successful," reported his navigation officer. "All 200 vessels accounted for and in position." Song nodded, his face betraying no emotion. The Vengeance was an imposing vessel, 800 meters of gleaming metal and advanced technology that had been hidden beneath the Pacific Ocean for decades, waiting for this moment. "Second wave emerging now," announced the tactical officer. The display lit up with another grid of blue dots, perfectly aligned with the first. Then a third wave appeared, and a fourth. "The Corvin Border Patrol has detected our presence," said Communications Officer Yun. "They're requesting identification and purpose." "Let them wait," Song replied. "I want them to see our full strength before we respond." Wave after wave of ships continued to emerge from hyperspace. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, and support vessels, each taking its assigned position in the massive three-dimensional grid. The formation stretched across 50,000 kilometers of space, a display of precision that few species could match. On the Corvin border station, alarms blared as their sensors struggled to count the human vessels appearing before them. The station commander stared at his display in disbelief. Intelligence reports had always stated that humans maintained a token defense fleet of no more than 50 ships. "Current count," he demanded of his sensor officer. 3,200 and counting, Commander, came the shaky reply. Still more appearing. Back on the Vengeance, Commander Song allowed himself a small grim smile as the final wave of Earth's fleet took position. "All ships present and accounted for, sir," reported his tactical officer. 3,417 combat vessels plus support ships. Song turned to face his bridge crew. "The Corvins believed we had 50 ships," he remarked to his tactical officer. "They miscounted by several thousand." "Sir, we're receiving urgent communications from several species," Officer Yun said. "The Arcturians, the Regelian Confederation, and the Centauri Republic are all requesting information about our demonstration." Tell them we have no quarrel with peaceful species, Song replied. This is a matter between Earth and the Corvan Empire. News of the human fleet spread across the galaxy at light speed. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Species that had dismissed humans as peaceful but militarily insignificant frantically reassessed their intelligence. Trading markets plummeted as the balance of power shifted in an instant. Admiral Yun is hailing all ships, announced Officer Yun. Putting him through now. The main screen switched to show Admiral Yun on the bridge of the flagship, EDF Justice. Commanders, Yun addressed the fleet. For generations, humanity has chosen to heal rather than harm. We built hospital ships instead of warships. We offered aid to all species without condition. We did this not from weakness, but from strength. The Admiral's face hardened. The Corvans mistook our kindness for vulnerability. They targeted our healers, our doctors, our nurses, our patients. They killed our children. Today, they learned the cost of that mistake. Throughout the fleet, crews listened in silence. Our mission is clear, Yun continued. We will dismantle the Corvan military capability. We will apprehend those responsible for the attack on the Nightingale. We will establish new protocols to ensure that medical vessels are never targeted again. He paused, his eyes scanning the camera as if looking at each ship commander individually. But remember this, we are not like them. We do not target civilians. We do not destroy medical facilities. We are here for justice, not vengeance. That distinction matters. The screen returned to the tactical display. Commander Song turned to his crew. Set course for the Corvan military headquarters on Corva Prime, he ordered. Maximum speed. The massive human fleet began to move in perfect unison, thousands of ships accelerating as one. The formation maintained its precise grid, a testament to decades of hidden training and preparation. Across the galaxy, observers watched with a mixture of awe and fear. Many had wondered why humans, with their advanced technology, had never built a significant military force. Now they understood. Humans had never revealed their true capabilities because they had never needed to. Until today. As the Earth fleet approached Corvan space, Commander Song received a private message from Admiral Yun. The UNHCR's Mercy has been dispatched to follow our fleet. Dr. Li will serve as its chief medical officer. Song nodded in approval. Even now, as they prepared for war, Earth sent a hospital ship. It was a powerful reminder of who they were and why they fought. The fleet crossed into Corvan territory at precisely 800 Earth Standard Time, moving with unstoppable purpose toward a reckoning long overdue. General Minhan stood in the war room of the EDF Justice, watching as the holographic display tracked the battle unfolding across the Corvan home system. Red dots representing Corvan warships moved to intercept the human fleet. Blue lines traced the paths of Earth's vessels as they methodically divided the Corvan forces into isolated groups. First wave of Corvan ships approaching Sector 7, reported his tactical officer. Han nodded. Implement Pattern Delta. Disable their engines and weapons systems. Avoid destruction where possible. The officers around him worked with quiet efficiency. There was no cheering, no celebration as the first Corvan ships were rendered helpless. This was not a battle to be enjoyed. It was a task to be completed. The Corvan Defense Fleet had mobilized everything they had, over 500 warships. Their commanders had expected the humans to charge in blindly, fueled by rage over the Nightingale. Instead, Earth's forces moved with cold precision, executing complex maneuvers that separated Corvan ships from each other, targeting propulsion systems and weapons while leaving life support intact. General, Corvan Command is broadcasting a general order to their fleet, said Communications Officer Ryu. They're telling their captains to target our engines and force us to destroy their ships. Han frowned. They want us to kill their crews. Why? They believe we seek revenge, Ryu explained. They expect us to slaughter them and their civilians. They hope to use that to rally other species against us. Han shook his head. They still don't understand. Send this message to all human ships. Continue with disable-only protocols. No exceptions. In another part of the system, Commander Song's battle group surrounded the main Corvin military shipyard. The massive orbital facility could build 20 warships at once. Now it was defended by a ring of Corvin cruisers. They're moving civilians onto their military vessels, Song's sensor officer reported, using them as shields. Song's face hardened. Deploy the boarding teams. We'll remove the civilians first, then disable the ships. Special Forces teams in sleek shuttles launched from Earth vessels. They cut through Corvin defenses, boarded the ships, and evacuated civilians before disabling the vessels from within. Not a single civilian life was lost. As Earth forces pushed deeper into Corvin territory, the UNHS Mercy followed behind. The new hospital ship was larger than the Nightingale had been, with enhanced shields that could withstand military-grade weapons, a sad necessity in this new era. Dr. Minna Lee moved through the medical bay, checking on patients. Most beds were filled with injured Corvin military personnel, rescued from disabled ships. Some watched her with fear, others with hatred. "Why are you helping us?" asked a Corvin officer as Lee checked his bandages. "We destroyed your hospital ship." "You didn't," Lee replied simply. "Your leaders did. And this is a hospital ship too. We don't distinguish between patients." The Corvin fell silent, unable to comprehend the mercy being shown. In orbit around Corva Prime, the planet's orbital defense platforms, massive weapons that could destroy entire fleets, powered up to fire on the approaching Earth vessels. General Han had anticipated this. "Implement Operation Shadow," he ordered. Small, stealthy ships that had slipped past Corvin defenses attached themselves to each platform. They didn't destroy the weapons, they reprogrammed them, locking out Corvin controllers. "All orbital platforms secured," reported Han's second-in-command. "No casualties." On Corva Prime, Supreme Military Commander Dex watched in growing horror as his forces were systematically neutralized without being destroyed. Reports flooded in from across the system. Shipyards disabled, weapons factories shut down, communication arrays taken offline, all without significant loss of Corvin life. "Why aren't they killing us?" he demanded of his advisors. "They should be destroying everything." No one had an answer. The humans were fighting a war unlike any the Corvins had ever experienced, one designed to end their military capability while preserving their civilization. 3 days after the first human ships arrived in Corvin space, it was over. The entire Corvin military had been neutralized. Not a single civilian center had been targeted. The death toll was less than 200, all military personnel who had refused to surrender. General Han received the message he had been waiting for. The Corvin High Command bunker had been located. Special Forces had captured everyone inside, including those who had given the order to attack the Nightingale. "Send them to the Mercy," Han ordered. "Let Dr. Lee decide their treatment." When the captured Corvin leaders were brought before Dr. Lee, they expected execution. Instead, she assigned them beds, treated their injuries, and said only, "This is how humans wage war. Remember it." The reckoning wasn't measured in Corvin blood. It was measured in their complete defeat, delivered with a precision that left them no choice but to acknowledge humanity's superiority, not just in warfare, but in mercy. The grand hall of surrender on Earth was silent except for the scratch of a pen on paper. Supreme Leader Jun of the Corvin Empire sat at one end of a long table, his gray skin looking even more ashen under the bright lights. His hands trembled as he signed his name to the document that would forever change his empire's place in the galaxy. Across from him, Admiral Yoon sat straight-backed and solemn. His uniform was perfectly pressed, free of medals or decorations. He had no need for such displays. The power of Earth was now understood by all. When Jun finished signing, he pushed the document across the table. Admiral Yoon signed his own name with a steady hand, then looked up at the Corvin leader. "You mistook our restraint for weakness," he said simply. "Remember this. Humans will cross galaxies to heal others, But we will unleash hell upon those who harm our healers. June lowered his eyes. In just 7 days, Earth's hidden fleet had dismantled the entire Corvan military machine, a force that had taken centuries to build. The humans had done it with surgical precision, minimizing casualties while maximizing impact. The terms are fair, June admitted. More than fair, given what we did. The surrender terms required the Corvans to dismantle their remaining weapons, open their borders to inspection, and pay reparations to the families of those lost on the Nightingale. But there were no land claims, no demands for resources, no humiliating conditions that would destroy the Corvan civilization. "We do not seek your destruction," Admiral Yoon said, "only your understanding." The doors to the Grand Hall opened, and Dr. Minna Lee entered. She walked with a slight limp now, a reminder of her escape from Proxima IV. June could not meet her eyes. "Dr. Lee," Admiral Yoon acknowledged. "The surrender is complete." Lee nodded. "Then I'd like to present our proposal for the new galactic medical protocols." She placed another document on the table. This one was thicker, bearing the seals of not just Earth but dozens of other species. "The Galactic Council has already approved the framework," she explained. "These will be known as the Lee Protocols, though I argued against using my name." June finally looked up. "What do these protocols establish?" "Universal protection for all medical vessels and facilities," Lee replied. "Any attack on a clearly marked medical ship or hospital will be considered an act of war against all signatories." "And the enforcement?" June asked quietly. Admiral Yoon gestured to a view screen on the wall. It showed Earth's fleet, now positioned at strategic points throughout the galaxy. "Our ships will remain visible from now on," he said, a reminder of the cost of violating these protocols. 3 days later, representatives from every major species gathered in the Galactic Council chamber to formally adopt the Lee Protocols. Dr. Lee stood before them, still wearing her medical uniform rather than formal attire. "The attack on the Nightingale was a tragedy," she told the assembled delegates. "But from that tragedy, we have created something important. Never again will healers fear that their mission of mercy will make them targets." In the gallery, survivors from the Nightingale watched with tears in their eyes. Captain Park's family sat in the front row, his wife holding a folded Earth flag that had been recovered from the debris of the ship. After the signing ceremony, Supreme Leader June approached Dr. Lee. Earth security personnel tensed, but Lee waved them back. "Doctor," June said hesitantly, "I want you to know that those who ordered the attack on your ship have been removed from power and will face trial." Lee nodded. "Justice matters. But so does healing. That's why I've arranged for a team of Earth doctors to help establish a new medical training program on Corva Prime." June blinked in surprise. "After what we did, you would still help us." "That's who we are," Lee said simply. "It's who we've always been." As the delegates filed out of the chamber, Admiral Yoon joined Dr. Lee at the window. Together, they looked out at the stars. "We revealed ourselves to the galaxy," Yoon said quietly. "There's no going back." "No," Lee agreed. "But perhaps we've created something better. A galaxy where strength protects healing, rather than threatens it." Across the galaxy, Earth's ships maintained their vigilant positions. Their weapons remained powered down, but their presence sent a clear message to all species. Humanity would continue its mission of healing and exploration. It would extend friendship and aid to any who needed it. But the galaxy now understood the truth that had always existed beneath humanity's peaceful exterior. Their kindness was a choice, not a weakness. Their healers were protected by the most formidable fleet the galaxy had ever seen. And they would cross the stars to save a life, or to avenge one taken unjustly. The Lee Protocols would stand as a testimony to both aspects of humanity's nature, their dedication to healing, and their unwavering commitment to protecting those who heal.